I want to be honest from the start. I never imagined that I might come across a psychopath or a serial killer in my life. These people exist, of course, but what are the chances that one of these criminals might appear in your own neighborhood? Less than 1% chance, in fact, and that's optimistic. But this statistic went out the window for me on a July 4th night. That night made me sadder and more scared than I've ever been in my life, and it made me see that anyone can be dangerous, that people can hide dark secrets, and you don't realize it until it's too late. It all started with my son, Matt, who began to talk about a new friend called Javier. At first, I didn't think much of it, as it's quite normal for children to have imaginary friends, but as the days went by, Matt kept insisting that Javier was real and that he visited him every night. My wife Anna and I thought it was just a phase that would soon pass, so we didn't think too much of it. Although at first Javier's story worried us a little, we eventually stopped paying attention to it, and that was our worst mistake. The concern increased when Matt started to appear with unexplained bruises and told us that Javier had made him promise not to tell us anything. It was his little secret, as he put it. At that point, Anna and I were desperate. Every time we tried to talk to Matt about Javier, he shut down and wouldn't say a word. In view of the circumstances and how worrying everything was becoming, we decided to consult a child psychologist who told us that it was a phase and that eventually this imaginary friend would go away. But he couldn't have been more wrong. When July 4th arrived, our house was full of laughter and joy. We had a barbecue, and of course we had invited friends and family to stay and watch the fireworks. Matt seemed especially excited, which made us all a little happier as the children played in the backyard and the adults enjoyed the food. We had all planned to stay until after midnight, but as the night went on, I began to notice that some of our friends started to leave for various reasons, and we thought that maybe Matt would be disappointed that he wouldn't be able to set off fireworks with his cousins, but to our surprise, he didn't mind and told us that he could do it with Javier. When it got dark and everyone had left, we gathered in the patio to watch the fireworks. Matt was excited, holding a sparkler in one hand and a box of fireworks in the other. "Look, Dad, this is for Javier," he said with a big smile. "Of course, son, but be careful. This is dangerous. You can only do it when Mom or Dad are around, okay?" I tried to calm him down. The first fireworks exploded in the sky and we all applauded, but then I felt a strange uneasiness. I looked at Anna and noticed that she also seemed uncomfortable. "Did you hear that? It sounds like someone moved something in the house," I said. "Do you think someone broke in?" "I don't know, we should check," she suggested, visibly concerned. So we went into the house and asked Matt to go up to his room. "It was probably Javier," he said nonchalantly. We decided to ignore him and started to investigate where the sound was coming from, but we never imagined what we were about to discover. When we got to the kitchen, Anna and I were transfixed. In front of us was a guy about 6 feet tall, staring at us. His eyes were big and he was completely disheveled and dirty. He looked like a homeless man. The man smiled eerily and waved at us from afar. "Who are you and what are you doing in our house?" I asked, the tension rising. "Oh, don't worry. I'm a friend of Matt's. My name is Javier." Hearing that, I swear every hair on my body stood on end. So this was the friend my son was talking about? "He's real," I muttered, stunned, feeling a wave of panic rising in my stomach. "Has Matt been talking to you?" "Yes, and he told me about you," he said without flinching, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "So it's no problem, right?" At that moment I was filled with rage. This was a grown man, about 35 or 40 years old, and he was telling me that all this time he had been entering my house and having contact with my son behind our backs. "Where the hell do you think you are?" I growled angrily. "I don't let my son talk to strangers. Get out of my house right now." Without thinking twice, I lunged towards him to push him out. However, I didn't even get to touch him when Javier punched me in the stomach with such brutal force that I fell to the ground, almost knocked out, trying to catch my breath as he moved towards the stairs. "Matt, Mom and Dad know about us. We can't play here anymore," Javier said calmly. "I'll have to take you with me," he continued. "No, I don't want to go," my son shouted. "Matt, go to your room and lock the door," I shouted at him as I tried to get up. At that moment, Anna, seeing the situation, ran towards Javier with a broomstick and hit him on the head, but the guy simply ignored the attack and brutally knocked her down. She hit her head on the wall and fell unconscious on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. I felt paralyzed and completely useless in the face of the threat my family was facing, but the fear and the rage began to ignite something inside me. Now I knew I had to act, so as best I could, I lunged at Javier with all my strength. I had no idea how strong I was until he hit me again and again without giving me a chance. Soon I felt totally exhausted, and before I knew it, he had dragged me into the living room and thrown me against the wall. A sharp pain shot through my back and my vision blurred with the blood running down my face. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't respond. Then Javier came over, and that macabre smile of his was etched in my mind forever. You could tell he was enjoying every second of our despair. "Lucas invited me to stay," he said after kicking me a couple more times, and then, with all the calm in the world, he walked towards the stairs, giving me a mocking look that filled me with rage. That feeling of helplessness gave me a surge of adrenaline, and in the midst of my desperation, I grabbed a table lamp and with all my strength I threw it at his head. The blow made him stagger, which gave me the perfect opportunity, and I wasn't going to waste it, so I pounced on him, hitting him mercilessly with a plaster ornament that was the first thing I found at hand. Finally, I had managed to get him on the floor, feeling that, for a moment, I had the upper hand. At that moment, I saw that Anna was beginning to regain consciousness. Although she was still very dizzy, I was still hitting Javier in the face, convinced that I was winning. But in the blink of an eye, Javier took a knife out of his jacket and plunged it into my leg. I screamed in pain at that moment and fell backwards, holding my wound. Anna tried to lunge at him, but before she could do anything, she fell to the floor, unable to stand. So now we were both lying on the floor, crying helplessly as Javier went upstairs. I saw him look at the door to Matt's room, and that smile became even more sinister. I knew he was going to try to take my son. "Matt, he's at your door. Don't open it, son," I shouted desperately, although I could hardly hear myself. Then, with that same satanic little smile, Javier opened the door, but to his surprise and everyone else's, Matt was ready, holding a lit flare that glowed with fury. And just as Javier entered, fireworks began to explode in the sky, but also in our house. Matt threw the flare and the fire hit Javier right in the face. His screams of pain echoed throughout the house, and he fell to the ground, holding his face in despair. The room was filled with lights and explosions, and Matt quickly ran to Anna and me, and with his help I finally managed to get up while Javier lay on the ground, still screaming in pain. Now was our chance to escape. We ran out of the house, shouting for help to our neighbors, who soon came to our aid. The police arrived shortly after and arrested Javier, who turned out to be a very dangerous fugitive who had been prowling around our neighborhood for weeks. The situation had devastated our family, but little by little we began to recover. However, I soon felt that something had changed in Matt. He was a child full of energy and very cheerful, but after that night he became calmer and more reserved, and to make matters worse, he became obsessed with fireworks and explosions. This strange behavior of my son's continued for several weeks, so my wife and I decided to take him to therapy, and although he seemed to be improving, his personality changed forever from that moment on. With time, Anna and I learned to live with it and thought that it was okay, that maybe it was just a new phase, and when it was finally time for university, we thought he was ready to face the world. But as we would soon discover, Matt was very far from being okay. In March 2018, we learned that Matt had carried out several bombings, causing the deaths of several people. But when the police were about to catch him, Matt did something terrible. He detonated a bomb in his own car as a diversion to try to escape, but the explosion hit him, killing him instantly. Unfortunately, my son ended up becoming a victim of his own horror. Matt was a good kid, but that terrible moment in his childhood scarred him forever. From that incident with Javier on, he became obsessed with fireworks and eventually with explosions. Now his name is forever etched as that of a ruthless killer. But for us, he will always be our little boy, a child who could have had a happy and normal life, but had it stolen from him by a monster. My Uncle Bobby moved into a retirement place a few years ago and loved it. He was always telling me to visit him, but the truth is that I never found the time. However, this June I finally managed to escape my responsibilities for a week to go and see him. It was a short trip, but it suited me, and I had no fixed plans, so I just wanted to relax. I found his house easily, as he lived in a small gated neighborhood of about 3 or 4 streets, and I passed a couple of his neighbors before parking in his driveway. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me on the porch. "You're right on time," he said with a smile when I came in, and after giving us a big hug, he gave me a tour of his house. The guest room was fine, but I opted to sleep on the sofa in his living room so I could watch TV on his giant screen while he went to sleep. He also showed me his backyard, which was full of bird feeders, just like my mom's. Apparently, that special love for birds ran in the family. Everything was beautiful until I noticed an old lady who was watching us strangely from the bushes. I was a little surprised to see her, not only because she seemed to be hiding there while she watched us, but also because the lady had a strange vibe, like she was scary. "Don't worry about her," said Uncle Bobby. "That's my neighbor, Sojara. She's a bit weird. She's from Romania, and she's always walking down the street looking at people. You get used to it after a while," he continued unconcerned. "I don't know if I'll get used to that," I replied. That night, I settled down on the sofa to watch a reality show, with Bobby snoring in the other room, but suddenly the TV picture changed from 5 women talking about their dramas to a black and white video. There was an old woman in a black gypsy dancer's costume with a bunch of carnations. She was standing on a lawn and then she began to dance. There was something hypnotic and at the same time chilling about her movements. I looked around for the remote control because I didn't understand what was happening, but then I realized that the TV was connected to the doorbell camera, so it was showing what was happening outside. I looked at the screen again and recognized my parked car in the background, so the old dancer was in our backyard. That was too much, so I jumped off the sofa, opened the front door and looked outside, but the patio was empty. Sojara had left. I spent the rest of the night turning what I had seen over and over in my head. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a bad dream or something like that, and the next morning, I told Uncle Bobby. "That must have been a dream," he said with a shrug, as if he didn't really care. We spent the day walking around the neighborhood, meeting up with his friends and enjoying a good barbecue. Luckily, Sojara didn't show up, but I did see her lurking in the street, watching us for a while with her messy gray hair blowing in the wind. Looking at her more closely, I got the feeling that she was the same woman from the video. Was it possible that they were the same person? I had no idea what was going on in that lady's head, but I was determined to keep her at a distance that night. When we got home, I sat on the sofa waiting to see the doorbell camera again, and sure enough, just after midnight, as if it were a horror movie, the TV came on with another video of Sojara dancing in the courtyard. It was the same dance she had done last night and with the same outfit and the same movements that had made me feel weird. But this time, I was ready. At that moment, I jumped off the sofa and ran towards the door, managing to catch the old woman just before she danced away. I grabbed her by the shoulders, but she didn't even try to resist. Instead, she slowly turned her head to look at me. And when I saw her up close, my heart stopped. It wasn't Sojara at all. It was a completely different old woman. Her eyes were pointing in opposite directions and her mouth was full of toothless gums. I was very shocked to see her. I couldn't believe how I could have confused that woman with Sojara. They had the same hair, but everything else was different, like a distorted mirror. "Who are you?" I asked her. But instead of answering, she leaned her head forward sharply as if trying to kiss me. I tried to move away quickly, but just the same, her rough lips made contact with my cheek. The sensation was horrible and filled me with terror. I had never had such a disgusting moment in my life, and I was angry at her audacity. I pushed the old woman away, but the burning sensation on my skin was still there, right where she had made contact. I didn't want to think about it, so I ran into the house, went to the bathroom, and took a long, hot shower. When I got back to the sofa, I was more confused than ever, trying to understand what had happened. Luckily, my uncle always got up really early, so I didn't have to wait long to talk to him. When I told him everything, at first he didn't believe me, but little by little his skepticism gave way to concern when he noticed a small wound on my cheek, right where the old lady had kissed me. I ran to the bathroom to see what was happening, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw that my cheek was covered with uncomfortable red and white pimples, as if I had an acne outbreak. This was disgusting, and it worried me. Was it some kind of herpes? I had no idea what to do. Since the spots seemed to be getting worse, my uncle and I decided to walk to the pharmacy at the end of the street, thinking we just needed some skin cream, so we started walking. But just as we reached the gates of the community, I saw Sojara in the bushes again, lurking like the day before. As soon as she saw us, she started to slip away, but my Uncle Bobby decided to talk to her. "What's wrong, Sojara?" he asked her. Then she came closer with a very serious expression and her eyes fixed on my face. "She came looking for you last night," she whispered. "She kissed you." "Do you know what that means?" she said in a mysterious voice. Bobby was left speechless, and before I could say anything, he demanded an answer. Sojara took a deep breath and began to explain that she knew the dancer, that she'd been following the old woman from her village in Europe, and that she appeared from time to time, cursing the houses with her dance. Sojara told us that for years, she had seen this figure just before something terrible happened to her friends and neighbors. "She appears 3 nights before the tragedy happens," she said, and that gave me chills. I've been watching the community to see if I'd see her again. "I'm glad you showed me the mark because I'm the only one who can help you." At that moment, I looked back at Bobby, begging inside myself to believe him. And although his face showed doubt, in the end I saw that he understood my fear and finally relented. He asked Sojara how he could help, and her words were, "You just need a simple cleansing ritual. I'll do it right in front of your house and you'll be safe." I felt a great relief upon hearing that, but then she casually added, "But I need $500 for supplies." Upon hearing this, my still skeptical Uncle Bobby frowned, but I again begged him to pay for it because I didn't have enough money, and in the end he agreed. An hour later, we returned with the skin cream, and Sojara appeared with a bag of Twizzlers and a pumpkin, which of course cost the $500. She then sat on the lawn with the pumpkin in front of her, and as she ate the candy, she began to sing a kind of weird spell. Then she broke the pumpkin with a stone. All this lasted only about 10 minutes, and then she left, saying that the curse was now broken. My uncle had his doubts, but after that night, the dancing woman did not return. We seemed to be safe for the rest of my stay. The following days were fairly normal, at least as normal as they could be. Bobby and I just wanted to have a good time and enjoy our stay. I always found it hard to sleep on that sofa because the image of that toothless woman would come back to haunt me, but I didn't see her again, nor did I see Sojara, which was a relief. On the other hand, Bobby seemed convinced that she had simply scammed us. He said that she had planned everything from the beginning, a trick to scare me and then appear at the perfect moment to ask for money. And to tell the truth, it made sense because although the woman was terrifying, she also looked like Sojara in those strange videos. Maybe they were sisters, but I didn't want to believe that. Deep down, my instinct told me that there was something more to this story. After all, the scar on my cheek was still there, right in the exact place where she had kissed me. The idea that it had all been a simple trick did nothing to calm my nerves. Who was this woman, really? Was she just part of a scam, or was there something dark and true about all this? I don't know, and maybe I'll never know. I just know that it was a terrifying experience that I never want to relive. It was a quiet place, one of those small towns where everyone knew each other. Here, people left their doors open and felt safe, at least until they arrived. I'm not one to scare easily. I've always thought that fear was more something for horror stories told in camp. But everything changed with the arrival of the gang. I have no idea when they started to appear, but their presence transformed our quiet neighborhood into a living hell. When they passed by, you couldn't miss them. Roaring motorbikes, decorated with flames and scary clown faces. They were definitely intimidating. The city police seemed completely overwhelmed by the situation. After all, they were just a group of cops from a small town, and they were not ready to face a threat like this. Soon, everyone learned not to go out at night, to double lock their doors, and to pray that they wouldn't run into these maniacs because, of course, no one wanted to be the next victim of their senseless violence. I remember that at first I laughed at the rumors. I thought they were exaggerated stories invented to scare the kids, until the night I saw them with my own eyes changed everything. It was a normal night. I left the mechanic's shop after a long day, and as always, I went straight to the neighborhood bar for a beer before going home. However, the place was unusually empty that day, and people were whispering. The tension in the air was almost palpable, as if they knew something bad was going to happen. But I didn't pay any attention, so without giving it much thought, I sat down at the bar, ordered a beer, and tried to relax. It was then that I saw them for the first time. Through the window, a group of motorbikes roared past, and you could hear the hubbub of the bikers. There they were. That was the famous gang. The guys were wearing leather jackets. Their faces were painted with an absurd mix of colors, and chains hung from their belts. "Gee, I wonder where they've left the Joker," I said jokingly as I saw the bartender approach with a look of fear that said more than 1,000 words. "Joe, you'd better go home," he said. "It's not safe to be here when they're around." I looked at him somewhat skeptically, but his serious tone made me doubt, so I hurried to drink my beer, paid, and left the bar. As I walked home, a bad feeling began to grow inside me. The streets were deserted, and the sound of motorbikes was getting closer and closer. I quickened my pace, trying to get there before they did. But as fate is a playful thing, I wasn't fast enough, and as I turned a corner, there they were. 5 of them with their motorbikes lined up, waiting for who knows what. One of the bigger ones saw me and smiled, showing his yellowed and uneven teeth, and I heard him say to his companions, "It seems that someone hasn't learned the rules." I tried to remain calm, even though bad intentions were in the air, but I couldn't show them any fear. "I'm just trying to get home," I said, trying to sound normal as the huge guy took out a chain and started turning it slowly. "I don't want any trouble," I said, raising my palms in front of me, even though they were clearly looking for conflict there. "That's a problem, because we do want trouble," the big guy said. "You shouldn't be here, so we're going to teach you a lesson." After those words, without warning, the guy threw the chain at my face. I ducked just in time, but not enough, and I lost my balance, inevitably falling to the ground. I remember feeling an intense pain in my arm as one of the motorbikes passed very close to me. Adrenaline flooded through me, and I ran towards the first alley I saw, while the laughter of the gang echoed behind me and the sound of the chains hitting the pavement echoed throughout the place. The alley was narrow and dark, but I had no choice, so I ran as fast as I could, listening to their mocking laughter as they got closer and closer. And in my desperation to escape from that pack of lunatics, I tripped over a mound of garbage and almost fell flat on my face again. But I managed to stay on my feet as best I could. At the end of the alley, I saw a high fence. It was my only chance. I jumped with all my might, trying to grab the fence. My hands slipped on the rusty metal, and at that moment I felt the chain running up my leg. A sharp pain made me scream, but I managed to climb up and fall on the other side just in time. I collapsed on the ground, feeling like my heart was about to burst, and in the distance I heard the guy cursing from the other side of the fence for having lost me. They weren't making any real effort to catch me. It was clear that they were just enjoying the moment, but their fun was far from over. I got up from the ground aching and began to limp as fast as I could towards the main street. I wasn't planning on going home with those guys looking for me, so I spent the night hiding in an old abandoned warehouse. And after a while, I narrowed my eyes, listening to the motorbikes that passed by from time to time. Every time they did, my heart would race. But I tried to keep quiet, praying that they wouldn't find me, although I knew I couldn't stay there forever. It was 2 a.m. when I finally left the warehouse. The streets were still deserted, with an unsettling tranquility that only increased my paranoia. And when I finally reached my neighborhood, I felt relieved. I thought I had managed to elude them, but I was very wrong. My apartment was less than 2 blocks away, but when I turned the first corner, I was frozen in place. There they were, 3 of them sitting on their motorbikes right in front of my building, waiting for me. My heart started beating like crazy at that moment, and I put my hands to my head, thinking of some way to escape, but nothing came to mind. I tried to back away and find a new place to take cover and wait for the storm to pass, but it was no use. "Hey, look who decided to show up," said one of them when he saw me, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. I didn't reply. I knew it was pointless, so I did what anyone in my situation would do. I started running. However, this was also in vain. A man on foot is no match for a group of thugs on Harley motorbikes. They were on top of me, and before I could get any further away, I felt a strong blow on my back that paralyzed me. It was the big guy's chain. I fell to the ground with a pain that ran through my whole body. It was something indescribable. I tried to get up, but they didn't give me time. One of them kicked me in the side, taking the air completely out of me, while another hit me in the leg with a makeshift bat. The pain was like being hit by a truck. I had never experienced anything like it in my life. Do you like playing hide and seek? Well, now you see what happens when we catch you, mate. Rule number 1, don't come out when we're around. It was easy, but now you'll have to learn it the hard way, one of them said with a laugh. And what followed was something so horrible that it still haunts me in my nightmares. The beating was relentless and brutal. Chains, kicks, punches. My body became a jumble of pain, and with each blow, a heart-rending scream escaped from my throat without me being able to control it. I could feel my bones crunching and blood gushing from my wounds like a torrent. It was the most painful and humiliating thing I have ever experienced in my life, but for them, it seemed like a game. In the end, when they got tired of beating me, the big guy stared at me while he lit a cigarette. "We would have hit you less if you hadn't run away," he said calmly, but I could hardly hear him because one of my ears was completely deaf. Blood was coming out of my mouth and I was barely conscious, yet I remember it. "That's rule 2, he said. And without further ado, they left, leaving me there as if I were a simple piece of meat. With a titanic effort, I got up off the floor and began to limp towards my building. And to be honest, I don't even know how I did it. But every step was agony. I felt like all my ribs were broken and my leg wasn't going to hold me up for much longer. I staggered up the stairs, clinging to the handrail. And when I finally reached my door, I took out my keys with trembling hands and locked it behind me as I entered. It was a small victory. Once inside my apartment, I collapsed on the sofa. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet began to fade, and with it came the real pain. Every movement was torture. Even blinking hurt. I took off my t-shirt to see the damage and almost fainted when I saw how I looked. Dark bruises covered my entire torso, and I had bleeding cuts on my arms and legs, not to mention my face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor with a kitchen knife in my hand, waiting to hear the sound of the motorbikes again, but they never came back. The next day, the news spread like wildfire throughout the village, but no one dared to mention it out loud. Although everyone knew what had happened, no one asked if I was okay, and I didn't feel like talking to anyone either. Days went by, and the gang continued to prowl the streets as if they owned the place. I didn't even dare go to the hospital for fear of running into them on the way, so I just locked myself in my apartment until I recovered a little. And I only went out when it was absolutely necessary, but only during the day. I avoided any street where I might cross paths with them, and every time I heard the roar of a motorbike, my whole body would start to shake. In fact, even today I still jump. Although as the weeks went by it no longer hurt physically, my body seemed to remember every blow. Over time, the gang began to fade away. First, their rounds became less frequent, and then they stopped appearing altogether. No one knew why. Some said they had gone to haunt another village, and others believed they were simply bored with us. I had no answers, and honestly, I wasn't interested in looking for them. Today, years later, my town has recovered some of its former tranquility, and people are no longer afraid to go out at night. But I have never been the same again. I learned an important lesson that night. The world is not a safe place. Sometime later, I decided to close my workshop, and now I work from home, repairing small machinery. Since that day, I have been afraid of people. I feel that they all have bad intentions. The reason I'm telling you this is because I'm receiving therapy, and telling my story, getting it out for the first time, is part of my healing. I just want to be a normal person again. I don't know if I can, but I'm trying. Hi, my name is Roma, and this year I started university looking for lots of grants and loans to cover my expenses. I grew up in a foster home, and although my adoptive parents were great, they didn't have a penny saved for my education. And with 6 other children in their care, it wasn't easy. Over the past year, I had been in contact with my biological father, Thomas. We spoke from time to time on the phone, and he always seemed happy to hear from me, but we were definitely not close. So I couldn't believe it when one day I received a text message from him, telling me that he wanted to help me with my studies and inviting me to his house. He lived a considerable distance away, but I decided to go. However, I didn't want to get my hopes up. After all, Thomas had left me when I was just a baby and had never shown any concern for me in the past. When I arrived, he greeted me with a small wrapped gift. I opened the box not knowing what to expect, and to my surprise, there was a new phone inside, the latest iPhone model, a big improvement compared to the old one I had. Wow, he really wants to make amends, I thought. Tom explained to me that he wanted to put me on his cell phone plan so I would save some money. And even if it didn't solve my financial problems, at least I could save on the phone bill and focus on my career. But there was one condition. He wanted me to promise to call him every Sunday. It seemed strange, but I decided it wasn't a big sacrifice, so I happily accepted the gift. It felt good that he wanted to get closer to me, even though my adoptive parents had warned me to stay away from Tom. They told me some horrible things about him, but I tried not to think about that and saw this gesture as a sign that he wanted to be a real father after all these years. During the first 2 months of classes, I kept my promise and called him every Sunday. Our conversations were never long, but they were always enjoyable. He would ask me about my classes and my new boyfriend, whose name was Mike. I would try to ask him about him, but he would always change the subject. However, things got complicated one weekend when, by accident, I forgot to call him. The next day, I sent him an apologetic message, and his response was quite friendly. "It's okay, Roma, but please don't let it happen again." The following week, I forgot again. This time not because of my studies, but because I was out with Mike having a great time, and the truth is that I didn't think about Thomas until later that night, when I sent him another text message, but this time I didn't get a reply. The next morning, while I was in class, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a nurse from the local hospital telling me that I had to go there urgently, because Mike had been in an accident. My heart raced, and I rushed to the hospital immediately. There I found him in a coma. I found out that he had been brutally beaten the night before and left lying in the hospital parking lot. I guess he was semi-conscious when they found him. I was scared to death, and the only explanation I could come up with was that Tom was behind all this. He was punishing me for missing the call. But I didn't want to believe it. As I sat waiting in the room, I tried calling Tom, but this time he didn't answer. I was about to try to contact him again when I received a message. "How's your boy?" he wrote, accompanied by a laughing emoji. Despite what he said, the doctor had mentioned that they would call me if Mike's situation improved. So without wasting any time, I ran to my car and rushed to Tom's house, ready to confront him. The journey was madness, almost an hour and a half of pure tension. And when I arrived, I banged on the door hard and Thomas appeared instantly. He tried to hug me as if everything was fine, acting as if he had no idea why I was upset. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked. So I shouted at him, demanding to know if he had been responsible for the attack on Mike, to which he just shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I warned you, don't miss the calls on Sundays." I couldn't believe it. I was so angry that I couldn't think straight. This guy was completely crazy. At that moment, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, he went to make a coffee. But I took the opportunity and used my new iPhone to call the police, quite sure that I could hear everything he said. Just a few minutes later, an officer arrived, and I was surprised at how quickly they arrived. Thomas invited him in as if this were a normal meeting, and we sat down in the living room. I tried to explain the mess to the officer, but my words didn't flow, and Thomas smiled as the officer took notes. Then he asked him for his version of events, and the very cynical man told him he had no idea what he was talking about, and to top it all off, he took out a letter he had sent him some time ago. He knew he had written some, but he didn't think it mattered. The officer read the letter and made a disgusted face. Then he passed it to me. The text was clearly written in my handwriting, but I hadn't written it. The letter contained horrible things about how I hated Mike and my desire to hurt him, even mentioning an attack with a crowbar. It was a forgery, of course, but the policeman didn't care. He just handcuffed me and took me to a cell. I begged him to believe me, but he just repeated that I had the right to remain silent as they locked me up. Later, my lawyer informed me that Mike had died in hospital and that I was facing murder charges. But even more terrifying was that they found a crowbar with Mike's blood on it in my room. Now I'm waiting for the trial, and it seems that no one is going to listen to me. My lawyer suggests that I plead guilty to get a lighter sentence, and guess what? The only visitor I've had has been Thomas. He doesn't admit anything, but his evil expression makes it clear that everything went as he planned. "Don't worry," he said before leaving. "I'll see you every Sunday while you're here." Of course, I'm exactly where he wanted me to be. My name is Ethan, and I'm 19 years old. Until recently, I was a normal guy, although I've always had an attraction to the weird and the taboo, so when I heard about a game called The Plague, I didn't think twice. Legend had it that it was a cursed arcade machine that mysteriously appeared in the 80s, and then disappeared as quickly as it came. It was said that those who played it began to experience hallucinations, headaches, and in some cases, even went so far as to lose their minds. Of course, that appealed to me. I found a pirated version on the dark web, and when I downloaded it, I felt like I had struck gold. The night I decided to play, everything seemed normal. At first, the game was just a combination of bright colors and mesmerizing patterns, but quickly something began to change. After a while, I realized that I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. The geometric shapes seemed to move beyond the monitor, and I lost track of time. When I finally finished, I had a headache, but more than that, I felt euphoric. I didn't notice anything strange apart from that, so I just thought that all those stories were exaggerations. The next morning, I woke up with a brutal headache, but I let it pass, because the university was waiting for me and I was already late. But on the way to the subway station, I noticed something strange. Everything seemed more vibrant, as if the world were in full color. The graffiti on a wall seemed to dance, as did the awnings and everything around me. I shook my head, thinking it was the lack of sleep. But the journey was even worse. The train was packed with people, and suddenly some of the faces looked strange, with disproportionate eyes and twisted smiles. I held onto the bar, feeling the floor move and almost falling. When I arrived at the campus, I tried to concentrate, convinced that I just needed a coffee or something to eat. But when I sat down in class, the situation became even more complicated, because what the projector was showing were patterns similar to those in the game. I closed my eyes for a moment to try and focus, but I could have sworn I heard a buzzing sound, as if someone was talking right behind me, so I looked around, but there was no one there. During recess, I took the opportunity to go to the bathroom to wash my face. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about the cursed game. I just thought maybe I had a fever or something. But when I looked in the mirror, something was wrong. My reflection wasn't moving at the same time as me. It was like there was a strange delay. I left the bathroom as fast as I could, although for a second I could have sworn my reflection smiled at me. The pressure was building up inside me, and as I reached the corridor, I noticed that things were still spinning around me. The students were walking as if they were in a bad horror movie, and their movements were completely mechanical. A boy passed by me with a dark face, as if someone had erased his features, and at that point I felt like my heart would burst at any moment. Desperate to escape from the nightmare, I closed my eyes tightly and opened them suddenly, but nothing changed. Everything seemed just as strange. I felt like I needed some fresh air, so I decided to go out into the courtyard, where there are rarely any people. I preferred it that way, but as soon as I arrived, that feeling of being watched came back. Then I turned around and saw a figure on the other side of the campus. It was tall, thin, and dark. I couldn't make out its features, but I knew it was looking at me. I blinked several times, and when I did, it was gone. I tried to focus on the next class, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at the teacher, his face seemed to vanish as if he were melting. And before my eyes, some of my classmates seemed to have no eyes. I started to hear screams in my head, and I closed my eyelids tightly. No, this couldn't be real. I kept repeating to myself, and it was at that moment that I decided it was better to call it a day and go home. As I walked back, every corner seemed to hide something. I turned into an empty street, and there was the figure again. Closer, so I picked up my pace, almost running, trying not to look back. I could feel that presence even though it made no sound, but the real last straw was on the subway. I looked for an empty carriage and sat down to calm down, but suddenly the lights started to flicker. When they went out completely, I saw it. That figure was in front of me. It was taller than I had imagined, with claws instead of hands and a smile that was definitely not human. I closed my eyes and prayed for the lights to come back on, and when they did, the carriage was full of people as if nothing had happened, and the figure had disappeared. It was a complete nightmare. When I got out of the subway, everything seemed chaotic. The streets were full of people, but they all looked strange and distorted. The voices were just murmurs, and there was a constant noise that pierced my ears. I tried to call someone, but my phone only showed moving geometric shapes just like in the game, so I walked aimlessly with the world spinning around me. Then I saw those figures again, closer than ever, and I started running, pushing people out of the way while shouting for someone to help me, but there was no response. It was as if I were trapped in a bubble. When I couldn't take it anymore, I threw myself at a random guy begging for help. But before I could explain, strong hands held me down. They were police officers who threw me to the ground, ordering me to calm down. I shouted at them that something was chasing me, but they simply exchanged glances and took the news that I might be high. Once at the police station, they put me in a small cell, but they found nothing in my system. No drugs or alcohol, nothing. But then one officer mentioned that maybe I was crazy, and the other one nodded. Sitting in the corner of the cell, I tried to explain what had happened, but I saw in his eyes that he didn't believe me. The hours passed and the figure returned right outside my cell, but my reaction was to laugh. I don't know why I was laughing, but I couldn't stop, even though my body wanted to cry. When the policemen came to help me, their faces were the same as the figures, and the next thing I remembered was waking up in a white room with people talking around me, but I didn't understand anything anymore. Now I'm here, in this white and silent place. I think it's an asylum. Are we in an asylum? I asked a doctor a few hours ago. Have I gone crazy? But a doctor replied, I wouldn't say you've gone crazy. Maybe the game triggered something in your head that needs fixing. We'll work on it, Ethan, and you'll get out of here, but you have to concentrate. So that's what I'm trying to do. I just want to get my sanity back and think that all this was because of that damn game. When I think of the 4th of July, the first thing that comes to mind is not fireworks or family gatherings. For me, that day will always be terrifying. It is the date that reminds me of the most horrible moment of my childhood, when I met a truly evil person, a guy who not only wanted to rob us, but seemed to enjoy hurting us. For some reason, I managed to survive that experience, and now I want to share it, as a way of catharsis. I was a 12-year-old boy on my way back to my mother's house with my dad. It was the 4th of July, and the trip back felt eternal. The road was empty, and honestly, I was happy because even though my parents had broken up, it was the first time they had spent a holiday together that I could remember. I remember that my dad was in a good mood and he started telling me stories about his youth, about how they celebrated the 4th of July in their small town. Normally, I found those stories boring, but at that moment they seemed fascinating to me. So I listened attentively, enjoying the moment. And everything was going great until, while we were driving along a dark and lonely stretch of forest, suddenly a tremendous crash shook the car. A tree had fallen right in front of us, and my dad had braked in a hurry, avoiding a collision and probably saving our lives. While he caught his breath and made sure I was okay, he got out of the car to see what had happened. When he got out, he began to inspect the tree curiously, and it was a relief that it hadn't crushed the car. But then I noticed that my dad's expression changed from curiosity to terror. I didn't understand why he was so scared at that moment, but over time, I came to understand that he had realized that the tree hadn't fallen on its own. Someone had knocked it down. This was a trap. Suddenly, my father turned and looked at me with a tension that I will never forget. He had a face of terror, something I had never seen in him before. It was as if he had been transformed, and his trembling voice said to me, "Close the doors right now." I could hardly assimilate what was happening when out of nowhere a strange man ran towards me. I tried to close the door as I had been told, but it was useless. And before I could do anything, the guy opened the door, grabbed my t-shirt, and threw me out of the car as if I were a rag doll. I wasn't sure what he wanted to do. It was all too confusing. But at that moment, I saw my dad confronting the man, trying to separate him from me, but the guy was strong and seemed to be enjoying the fight. I saw how my father tried to defend himself, but he was quickly overpowered by the madman who beat him mercilessly. "Run!" my dad shouted. And without thinking twice, I ran towards the forest. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away from that place. I ran as fast as I could until my legs gave out, and when I finally stopped, I realized that I was completely lost. I looked around trying to get my bearings, but everything looked the same. The silence of the forest was disturbing, and I no longer heard my dad's screams or the noise of the fight, only the chirping of some crickets. I felt footsteps behind me and I turned around expecting to see my father, but instead I saw the psychopath. His dark figure moved among the trees, stalking me. "Oh, the 4th of July. Did you know that today is a very special day in the history of the United States? It's the day we celebrate the independence and greatness of our country," he said ironically. At that moment, I started running once again, tripping over roots and branches that got in my way, but I was terrified, and I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer and closer. However, I noticed that he stopped every time he was close enough. At that point, I realized that I never really managed to escape. The psychopath was toying with me, enjoying the game of cat and mouse. I remained completely silent, staring at the ground, trying not to make the slightest noise. I could hear the psychopath advancing, and the crackling of a branch to my right made me turn my head. There he was, just a few steps away, searching among the trees. I moved slowly, looking for a place to hide, and I discovered a small clearing. I crouched down behind a tree, trying to control my breathing while the guy stopped nearby, with a huge smile on his face. Time dragged on as I tried to think of how to get back to my dad, but the guy was gone and the fear paralyzed me. I had no idea where to find my father, and to be honest, I knew that if I decided to look for him, it was very likely that I would run into the psychopath first. Suddenly, I saw a flash in the sky, fireworks. The festivities had begun. It couldn't be, it was too early. Had my dad set them off? Maybe it was his way of guiding me back. Hope was reborn in me, and I took that as a sign, so I began to move silently towards the light of the sparklers. The psychopath also noticed the fireworks and started to follow in that direction, so I had to hurry. I ran with all my might, ignoring the pain in my legs and the terror in my chest. Finally, I spotted the car and my dad, who was looking around worriedly. "Dad, I'm here," I shouted. But just then, the psycho appeared behind me, grabbed me by the shirt and threw me back, showing me the shiny knife in his hand with a madman's smile. "Happy 4th of July, kid. You should be happy. This day is the heart and soul of our country," he said as he raised the knife towards me. I felt dead inside. There was nothing I could do. But suddenly, I saw my father move like a gust of wind, and he lunged towards the man. It seemed like he had heard my scream and came running to save me. My old man surprised the madman, who staggered a little and shouted at me, "Get in the car, son," as he took advantage of the confusion and ran towards the car, getting in quickly. We both arrived at the same time. My father started the engine in a jiffy and shot off. When we finally arrived at my mother's house, everyone was happy to see us. But when they noticed that I was covered in mud and my father's clothes were in tatters, the smiles instantly disappeared. We had faced something that should never have happened. My father called the police to tell them what had happened, and they assured us that they would do everything possible to find the man. I was hopeful, although I knew it could be complicated, but my father wasn't so sure. However, I was right, because the man was arrested a few hours later. The police found the fallen tree and knew that the guy was a threat. He didn't have to get out of the car because the psychopath ran straight out to attack them. Although they caught the madman, that was the last time I was able to enjoy a fearless 4th of July. Every time that date arrives, I don't dread anything in particular, but every time I see fireworks, my mind is filled with memories.